I arrived unannounced to visit my daughter. She was lying on the rug by the door, dressed in old, tattered clothes. Her husband wiped his shoes on her and told the guests, "She's our crazy maid." "No," I screamed. I stepped forward, and everyone froze because one of the guests dropped his glass and looked at me as if he'd seen a ghost. 20 years ago, I saved his life. For 4 hours, I held his intestines in my hands on the operating table. He swore he would return the favor one day. That moment had arrived, but I didn't know the most important thing yet. I didn't know that my daughter had married that man because he reminded her of me. I didn't know that her whole life she had searched for a man who would control her, humiliate her, and destroy her, because I was the one who taught her that this was what love looked like. Her husband turned out to be me, just louder and more honest. And now, to save my daughter, I will first have to admit that I was the one who broke her. The Uber pulled over about 300 yards from the estate and the driver cut the engine, making it clear he wouldn't go any further. I, Victor Serrano, looked at him through the rearview mirror and saw the tight lips of a man who had made a final decision and wasn't going to budge. "I can't go any closer," the driver said without turning around. "The owner of this place doesn't like strange cars near the gate. Last time I came here, security slashed my tires. I still need this car for work." I didn't argue. I paid, grabbed my small duffel bag from the back seat, and stepped out onto the shoulder of the country road. The October wind hit my face, carrying the scent of rotting leaves and distant smoke. The mansion sat on a hill, surrounded by wrought iron gates and a hedge that looked impeccably manicured even on this overcast day. The taxi turned around and disappeared, leaving me alone on the empty road. I stood there for a minute, staring at the house where my daughter lived. 3 stories, white columns, panoramic windows, wealth that was supposed to mean happiness. A year and a half ago, at the wedding, I looked at Anna and thought she had finally found what she deserved. A young, successful, polite husband, a house that looked like a palace, a future where she'd never have to count pennies until payday, the way her mother used to. Since then, Anna had stopped answering my calls. First, she just wouldn't pick up, then she'd send short texts, "Busy. I'll call you later." Later never came. I wrote emails, but the replies became increasingly brief and formal until they stopped altogether. I called the house landline, but a polite female voice always informed me that Mrs. Anna Victoria was resting and couldn't be disturbed. 3 weeks ago, I received the last message from my daughter. Just 2 words. "Dad, help." I called back immediately, but the number was out of service. Since then, the phone had remained silent, and now I was here, unannounced, uninvited. A 60-year-old retired army surgeon who had seen a lot in his life, but I had never felt a chill in my chest like the one I felt now. Looking at that beautiful white house, I threw my bag over my shoulder and walked up the driveway toward the gates. With every step, the cold in my chest intensified, though I couldn't explain why. Everything looked normal. A well-kept lawn behind the fence, luxury SUVs in the driveway, lights in the first-floor windows, the sounds of music and laughter coming from somewhere inside. There was a security booth by the gate, but it was empty. I pressed the buzzer and waited. No one answered. I pressed it again, longer this time. Still silence. Then I pushed the small pedestrian gate next to the main entrance, expecting it to be locked, but it swung open easily. I entered the grounds and walked toward the front entrance. Now I could hear the music more clearly, some kind of jazz, and the voices of many people. There was clearly a party going on. Stepping onto the porch, I rang the doorbell. I waited, then rang again. No one opened the door, even though I could hear noise behind it. I walked around the house to the right, staying close to the wall. The music got louder. Rounding the corner, I found a terrace with floor-to-ceiling windows through which I could see a large ballroom filled with people. Men in expensive suits, women in evening gowns, servers with trays, a shimmering chandelier hanging from the ceiling. I scanned the room for my daughter but couldn't find her among the guests. Further along the wall, I discovered a small side door, clearly a service entrance for staff. I pushed it, and it was unlocked. Inside was a narrow hallway with white walls that smelled like cleaning supplies, a service corridor leading to the main rooms. I walked down it, opened another door, and found myself in the mansion's foyer. And that's when I saw my daughter. Anna was lying on the floor by the front door, directly on the decorative rug that said welcome. She was wearing a faded gray t-shirt and sweatpants with holes in the knees. Her hair, once thick and shiny, hung in tangled, greasy clumps. She wasn't moving, just staring at the ceiling with hollow eyes, as if she didn't see or hear anything around her. Guests walked past her as if she were a piece of furniture. Some stepped over her legs, others walked around without looking down. And then, a young man in a perfectly tailored gray suit stepped out from the ballroom. I recognized him. Adrian, Anna's husband, the son-in-law I'd only seen at the wedding, who back then had given the impression of being a polite and self-assured man. Adrian approached the door without looking at the floor, stood directly on Anna, on her stomach, and began to wipe the soles of his patent leather shoes. He rubbed first one, then the other, as if she weren't a person, but a simple doormat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, addressing the guests in the foyer. "Don't mind her. She's our crazy maid. The poor thing isn't right in the head, but we look after her. It's our way of giving back to the community." Some guests laughed, others shook their heads with fake compassion. No one protested. I was standing at the entrance of the service hallway, and the world around me shrank to the size of that scene, to my daughter's body on the floor, to the polished shoes on her abdomen, to the laughter that sounded like glass grinding against glass. I didn't scream, I didn't lunge forward. I took one step, just one step, into the foyer. And at that moment, someone in the ballroom dropped a glass. The tinkling of crystal against the marble floor made everyone turn their heads. Standing at the entrance to the ballroom was a gray-haired man in his mid-60s wearing an impeccable navy blue suit. The champagne glass lay at his feet, and a golden puddle was spreading across the floor. But he didn't notice. He was staring at me as if he'd seen someone rise from the grave. I recognized him too. I had seen those eyes 20 years ago when they opened after an operation that lasted many hours. Guerrero. Ignacio Guerrero. Back then, he was a young entrepreneur who had suffered a terrible accident on a mountain highway. A ruptured spleen, liver damage, multiple internal hemorrhages. Any other surgeon would have rejected the case, saying there was no hope. I operated for 4 hours straight, literally putting the man back together piece by piece. When Guerrero regained consciousness, he cried and repeated, "I will return the favor, no matter what it takes. I'm in your debt for the rest of my life." Now, that man stood in the middle of the party, looking at me with eyes full of terror. "Victor Serrano," Guerrero whispered, his voice trembling. Adrian raised his head at the sound of the name and looked at his father-in-law. For a second, his face froze, and something sharp and dangerous flashed in his eyes, like the blade of a hidden knife. But then his expression changed as if someone had flipped a switch. Adrian smiled broadly. "Dad!" he exclaimed, stepping off Anna's body and walking toward me with open arms. "My God, what a surprise, what a wonderful surprise. Why didn't you let us know? We would have welcomed you properly." I didn't return the hug. I looked past my son-in-law at my daughter, who was still lying on the floor. Anna slowly turned her head and looked at me. In her eyes, there was no recognition, only emptiness and something like fear. "Anna," I called out, and my voice sounded hoarse. She blinked once, then again. Her lips moved. "Dad?" she whispered so softly I could barely hear her. "Dad, are you alive?" Adrian turned back to the guests, still smiling. "Friends, excuse this little scene. My wife and her father haven't seen each other in a long time. She got worked up. You know how emotional women can be. He signaled to the security guard by the door, who began gently ushering the guests back into the ballroom. People left, looking back with curiosity, whispering about what they had seen. Guerrero didn't move. He remained standing, staring at me, and in his eyes, I could read something like a plea. Adrian walked over to Anna and helped her up. She moved like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. Her arms hung limp at her sides, and I saw the marks on the inside of her elbows. Small bruises, track marks, many marks. "Honey, look who's here," Adrian murmured, holding his wife by the waist. "Your dad. Isn't it wonderful?" Anna looked at me, and slowly, very slowly, something living appeared in her eyes. Recognition, and with it, fear, a fear so intense that her whole body shuddered. "Are you alive?" she repeated. "He said you had died." He showed me the newspaper, an obituary. "What?" I took a step toward her. "What obituary, Anna? What are you talking about?" Adrian laughed, and that laugh sounded absolutely natural, absolutely carefree. "My poor girl. See, Dad, how she confuses things. It's the illness, hallucinations, delusions. The doctors say it's a form of schizophrenia triggered by substance abuse. Yes, it's hard for me to talk about this, but your daughter became addicted to illegal substances. I do everything I can to help her, the best doctors, the best meds, but so far, unfortunately, without much progress." I looked into my son-in-law's eyes. 30 years of surgical practice had taught me to see a lie, to see the hidden fear behind the bravado, to see the calculation behind the smile. "I want to speak with my daughter alone," I said. Of course, Adrian nodded. "But first, let's get you settled. We have plenty of guest rooms. You must be tired from the trip. And I'm going to put Anna down for a rest now. She needs to take her medication. I want to talk to her now. Dad, please." Adrian lowered his voice and stepped closer. "Don't make a scene in front of the guests. These are important people. My business depends on them. Let's talk about everything calmly, as a family. I'll take Anna upstairs, and then you and I can talk man to man. Deal?" He didn't wait for an answer. He took Anna by the elbow and led her toward the staircase to the second floor. She walked behind him obediently, like a child. Only once did she look back at her father, and the pain in her gaze was so sharp it took my breath away. I tried to follow them. I took a step toward the stairs, and then 2 burly men in black suits appeared in front of me as if they had sprouted from the floor. "Security." "Excuse me, sir," one of them said politely but firmly. "The master asks that you wait for him in his study." I could have tried to push past, could have made a scene, but I understood it would be useless. 2 guards against a 60-year-old man. Even if I made it upstairs, then what? Adrian would call the cops and, technically, he'd be in the right. Trespassing, assault. I needed information. I needed a plan. "Fine," I said. "Where is the study?" Adrian led me to his study, a spacious room with oak-paneled walls, a massive desk, and leather armchairs. Behind the glass of the bookshelf stood rows of books that clearly no one had ever read. The spines were too perfect, the bindings too identical. The guards remained outside the door. I walked over to the window and stared out at the dark garden, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with the rage I was holding back with all my might. The door opened and Guerrero walked in. He looked 10 years older than when I'd seen him in the foyer. He closed the door behind him and stood there, not daring to come any closer. "Victor Serrano," he began, his voice shaking. "I didn't know. I swear by everything holy, I didn't know." "Didn't know what?" "I didn't turn away from the window. What he's doing to her. I thought she was happy." I'm the one who introduced them. That is my sin. I finally turned and looked at the man whose life I had saved 20 years ago. Tell me, I said. Everything. From the beginning. Guerrero collapsed into an armchair as if his legs could no longer support him. It started 2 years ago. I was at a charity gala, and Adrian was there too. He's the son of a former business partner. We got to talking, and he mentioned he was looking for a wife. I thought of your daughter. She was working for a publishing house then. I'd seen her a few times, smart, beautiful, modest. The ideal wife for a man in his circle. He rubbed his forehead. I introduced them. I organized a meeting at a reception. They hit it off. 6 months later, they were married. I was there. I saw how she looked at him. She was in love, truly in love. He paused. Then I went to Europe for 6 months on business. When I returned, I started hearing rumors that Adrian's young wife was ill, that she had a drug problem, that he was taking her from doctor to doctor. I wanted to visit, but Adrian always had an excuse: quarantines, Anna feeling poorly, or they were away for treatment. Guerrero looked up at me. Today was the first time Eve's seen her in a year. And I saw you, and I understood. I understood that he's doing the same thing to her that he did to the others. I felt the chill in my chest turn to ice. What others? Guerrero opened his mouth to answer, but at moment the door burst open and Adrian walked in. He was smiling, but his eyes were cold and watchful. Ignacio, he said reproachfully, leaving the guests for a private conversation. That's not very polite. Guerrero stood up, and I saw him pale. Fear. This influential man was afraid of a 35-year-old. I only wanted, Guerrero started. I understand, Adrian interrupted. You wanted to pay your respects to my wife's father. Very touching. Now, please, return to the guests. I need to speak with my father-in-law alone. Guerrero looked at me. In his eyes was something like an apology and a warning. We'll see each other again, he said softly and left. Adrian closed the door and turned to me. The smile vanished from his face like a chalk drawing erased from a board. He walked to the desk and sat in a high-backed chair. Well, he said. Let's talk man to man. He leaned back and crossed his arms. Sit down. This will be a long conversation. I didn't sit. I stayed by the window, arms crossed, looking at my son-in-law the way I used to look at junior officers who tried to lie to me. That look usually made people sweat, but Adrian held it without flinching. Suit yourself, he shrugged. Stay standing if it makes you comfortable, though at your age, I'd watch those legs. Now, what's going on with my daughter? You're demanding an answer. Adrian sighed as if explaining something obvious to a slow child. He opened a desk drawer, pulled out a folder, and placed it in front of him. I hoped it wouldn't come to this. I hoped you'd accept the situation as it is, without unnecessary questions, but since you insist, here. He flipped the folder open. Medical reports on official letterhead, prescriptions, photographs. Your daughter is sick, Adrian said with carefully rehearsed sadness. Schizoaffective disorder triggered by substance abuse. In simple terms, she got hooked on drugs 3 months after our wedding. First cocaine, then something harder. I tried to stop her, but it was too late. The psychosis, the hallucinations, the aggression started. He pulled a photo from the folder and slid it toward me. It was Anna, but she was hard to recognize. Her hair was wild, her eyes crazed, her mouth twisted in a scream. She was standing in a corner, clutching a knife to her chest. This was 8 months ago, Adrian said. She tried to stab me. Claimed I was poisoning her food, that I wanted to kill her. Classic paranoid delusion. I picked up the photo and examined it. My trained surgeons I noticed details an ordinary person would miss. Dilated pupils, unnatural skin pallor, a body posture characteristic of someone struggling with a loss of coordination. This didn't look like cocaine psychosis, this looked like poisoning. I took her to the best specialists, Adrian continued. A clinic in Switzerland, professors from Germany. They all say the same thing. Irreversible changes to the psyche. She'll never be who she was before. He pulled out more documents with official stamps. I could have had her committed to a locked psychiatric ward. I had every right. But I love your daughter, Victor, despite everything. That's why I keep her at home, provide care, pay for the treatment. It costs me a fortune and my sanity, but I don't complain. I dropped the photo back on the desk. Why was she lying on the floor by the door? I asked calmly. She put herself there. Adrian spread his hands. It's part of her disorder. Sometimes she refuses to get up for hours. Sometimes she strips naked and runs through the house. Sometimes she screams that she's been abducted by aliens. Doctors call it catatonic episodes. And the part where you wiped your feet on her? Adrian froze for a second. I saw a spark of irritation in his eyes, but it was immediately replaced by patient compassion. I didn't even notice she was lying there, he said. Can you imagine how horrible that is? My own wife lying on the floor, and I'm so used to it that I just walk past without looking. That's what it's come to. This is what I live with every day. He shook his head, playing the role of the exhausted, desperate husband so convincingly that an unsuspecting person would have believed him without a doubt. Listen, Victor. Adrian leaned forward, his voice becoming almost confidential. I know it's hard to accept. She's your daughter. You remember her differently, healthy and happy. But the reality is what it is. Anna is sick. Seriously, possibly incurably. I'm doing everything in my power to ease her suffering. I remained silent, processing what I'd heard. In 30 years as a surgeon, I had learned to listen not just to words, but to the pauses between them. I knew how a person breathes when they tell the truth and when they lie. Adrian was lying. I was as sure of that as I was of my own name, but certainty wasn't enough. I needed proof. She said I was dead, I said. She said you showed her an obituary. Adrian sighed again, this time with a touch of condescension. And you believe a woman who claimed yesterday that the neighbor's cat was speaking German to her? He shook his head. Victor, I understand a father's feelings, but let's be realistic. Anna can't distinguish reality from her hallucinations. She probably saw an obituary for some stranger in a magazine and decided it was you, or she just made the whole story up. He leaned back, his expression shifting to something evaluative and calculating. Let's be frank, he said. I know what you think of me. I saw it in your eyes when you walked in. You think I'm a monster mistreating your daughter. But the truth is, I'm the only person looking after her. He stood up and walked to the wet bar in the corner, pouring himself a bourbon in a heavy crystal glass. Where have you been for the last year and a half? He asked without turning around. She stopped answering your calls, and you just resigned yourself to it. You didn't come. You didn't check. Do you know why? Because it was convenient for you to think she was happy. Convenient not to know the truth. I felt those words hit the mark because they were true. I had convinced myself that my daughter's silence meant she was busy, not in trouble. I'd convinced myself that a wealthy husband would take better care of her than I ever could. But I was by her side, Adrian continued, turning back to me with the glass in his hand. Every day, every night, when she screamed from nightmares, when she didn't recognize me and called me other names, when she tried to throw herself out the window. I held her hands and begged her to live. Me, not you. He took a sip of bourbon and narrowed his eyes. So before you judge me, look at yourself. What kind of father were you if she didn't call you for help when it all started? Maybe because she knew you didn't care. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to lunge across the room and strike that arrogant bastard. I wanted to grab him by the throat and shake the truth out of him. But I held back because I knew that was exactly what Adrian wanted. One punch, a call to the police, an assault charge, and a restraining order. This man was smart, dangerously smart. You know, Adrian continued, his voice taking on a new, almost friendly tone. Anna told me a lot about her childhood. About you. About her mother, Lydia. At the mention of my wife's name, I flinched, and Adrian noticed. A faint smile touched his lips. She told me how her mom was afraid of you. How she'd tiptoe around the house so as not to disturb the great surgeon. How she'd cry in the bathroom at night so no one would hear. How she'd beg you to let her visit her sister for a week, and you'd say no, because her place was by her husband's side. I stood frozen. Every word fell on me like a stone. Anna said her mother didn't die of a heart attack. Adrian's voice turned soft and insinuating. She died of living with you. One morning, she just didn't want to wake up. The body failed because the soul had given up long before. Shut up. I heard my own voice as if it were coming from someone else. The truth is uncomfortable, isn't it? Adrian stepped closer, something dark and amused dancing in his eyes. You recognize me, don't you, Victor? You recognize me because we're alike. I'm just doing the same thing you did, only I'm open about it. I don't hide behind the mask of an intellectual doctor. Anna chose me because I felt familiar, because you taught her that a man should control and a woman should obey. He stopped 2 paces from me and looked me directly in the eye. So if you want to know who's to blame for your daughter lying on that, welcome, Matt, look in the mirror. You started it. I'm just continuing it. I swung. I didn't plan it. I didn't have time to think. My fist flew forward and connected with Adrian's jaw. He went flying backward, crashing against the desk and knocking over his glass of bourbon. The amber liquid spilled across the documents. The door burst open and the 2 guards rushed in. They grabbed my arms and twisted them behind my back. I didn't resist. I just stood there watching as Adrian got up, rubbing his jaw. Well, he said, and I heard satisfaction in his voice. That was predictable. Aggression, inability to control emotions. Now it's clear where Anna gets it from. He signaled the guards, and they let go of me but remained standing right behind me. I could call the police, Adrian continued, sitting on the edge of the desk. Assault in my own home is a criminal matter. But I won't, because I understand your feelings. You're a father, you're upset. I forgive you. He leaned forward, and his voice hardened. Here is what I'm proposing, Victor. You go home today. Right now. You go back to your life and you never come here again. I will transfer enough money to your account every month for you to live well, travel, fine dining, healthcare, whatever you want. And if I refuse? Adrian shrugged. Then he'll have Anna committed to a long-term, high-security psychiatric facility. I have all the necessary paperwork, medical reports, and doctor signatures. A judge will declare her incompetent in a single day. And you? He'll charge you with trespassing and assault. My godfather is a state Supreme Court judge. How do you think that ends for you? I was silent. My mind was racing. Anna on the floor, the needle marks on her arms, those hollow eyes, the words "Are you alive?" And alongside that, Adrian's words about Lydia, about the wife who cried in the bathroom, about the control, about Anna choosing someone just like me. The terrible realization was that there was truth in his words. Not the whole truth, but the part one had hidden from myself for 20 years. Think it over, Adrian said almost gently. I'm not a monster, I'm a pragmatist. I don't need a scandal. I don't need a war with relatives. I need peace. Go. Live well, and everyone's happy. He stood up and headed for the door. The guards will escort you out. They'll call a car for you. Think about my offer on the way. If you accept, call this number tomorrow. He placed a business card on the edge of the desk and walked out. The guards took me by the elbows and led me to the exit. I didn't resist. I walked through the halls of the mansion, past expensive furniture, paintings, and sculptures, thinking only of one thing. Needle marks, dilated pupils, loss of coordination, slurred speech. I had seen that before. More than once during my service in the military hospital, when they brought in prisoners who had been interrogated with chemical substances, drugs that erase the will, drugs that cause hallucinations and paranoia, drugs that make a healthy person look insane. Anna wasn't being treated, she was being poisoned. The guards pushed me out the front door and left me on the porch. Down in the driveway, a taxi was already waiting. I walked down the steps, got in, and gave the address of the train station. The taxi pulled away, and the mansion began to shrink in the rear window. But I wasn't looking back. I was looking at the business card still in my hand. On the back, underneath the printed phone number, someone had handwritten. Guerrero today, 11, River Street. I'm waiting. The handwriting was unfamiliar. One of the guests. Someone who had seen what happened. I put the card in my pocket and gave the driver a new address. The house on River Street was an old mansion squeezed between modern office buildings, like a fragment of the past century that the city had forgotten to demolish. The taxi stopped in front of wrought iron gates, behind which lay a neglected garden with bare trees and cracked stone paths. I paid and got out, feeling the night chill seep under my coat. The gates were slightly ajar, as if waiting for me. I walked up the path to the heavy wooden door, and before I could even knock, it opened. Guerrero stood in the doorway, his jacket off, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days and didn't plan to for many more. Come in, he said softly, stepping aside. The house smelled of old wood and book dust. Guerrero led me through a dark hallway to a parlor where a fire was burning in the hearth. 2 armchairs faced the flames. On a small table between them sat a decanter of brandy and 2 glasses. Sit down, Guerrero said. This will be a long conversation. I sat, but I declined the brandy. Guerrero poured himself a glass, took a large swallow, and slumped into the opposite chair. For several minutes we sat in silence, watching the fire. Then Guerrero spoke. 20 years ago, you pulled me back from the brink, he began. I was dead, Victor. The paramedics had closed my eyes and told my wife to prepare for a funeral. And then you appeared. 4 hours on the operating table, 43 sutures, 7 liters of donor blood. You put me back together like a broken doll. He swirled the brandy in his glass. When I woke up, the first thing I said was a promise that I'd return the favor, no matter what it cost, at any time. I remember every word because Eve repeated it to myself every single day for all these years. Then return it now, I said. Tell me everything you know about Adrian. Guerrero looked up at me, his eyes filled with the pain of someone preparing to confess something terrible. I have to start with myself, he whispered. Because without that, you won't understand. Adrian is my sin. I created that monster. He set down his glass and clasped his hands in front of him. His father, Paul Dominguez, was my business partner. We started together in the 90s, when money was made in ways that are better left forgotten. Paul was a ruthless man, but I considered him a friend. When Adrian was 15, Paul asked me to be his godfather. I accepted without a second thought. He stood up and walked to the fireplace. Adrian grew up a strange boy, intelligent, charming, but cold. He never cried, not even when he scraped his knee or got bad grades. I thought it was strength of character. Now I realize it was the absence of something vital inside. The thing that makes us human. What happened to his wives? I asked. Guerrero turned, his face tightening. The first, Marina, was a banker's daughter. A beautiful girl, 22 years old, fresh out of college. They married 6 years ago. A year later, she ended up in a psychiatric clinic in Switzerland. Official diagnosis: acute psychosis from drug addiction. Her parents tried to get her out, but Adrian managed to have her declared incompetent. Now he's her legal guardian. Her entire inheritance, which was substantial, passed into his control. He returned to the chair and sat down heavily. The second wife, Olga, was an industrialist's widow, 5 years older than Adrian. A very wealthy woman. They were married 11 months. Then she died of a sleeping pill overdose. The investigation was closed in 3 weeks. Suicide due to depression, they said. Adrian inherited everything. And you stayed silent. My voice was hollow. I didn't know. Guerrero raised his hands defensively. I swear it. Paul was still alive then. He covered for his son, and I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to believe. Adrian was so charming, so convincing. He cried at Olga's funeral, real tears. I held his shoulder and comforted him. He covered his face with his hands. When he asked me to introduce him to your daughter, I was happy to help. I thought I was doing something good, bringing 2 good people together. Anna was so radiant, so full of life. I thought she would change him. When did you realize the truth? 3 months ago. Guerrero uncovered his face. Paul was dying of cancer, and I visited him in the hospital. We were alone, and he started talking, confessing, the way dying men sometimes do. He told me about Marina, about Olga, about how he paid doctors for false diagnoses, how he bribed investigators and judges. He was proud of it, do you understand? Proud of the son he had raised. His voice broke. He said Adrian was special, that he knew how to see things in women they didn't even know about themselves. Their weaknesses, their fears, their wounds. And he used it all to break them from the inside. That was his word. Break, I felt a chill run down my spine. Why didn't you go to the police? Guerrero gave a bitter laugh. With what? The ramblings of a dying old man. Without proof. By then, Adrian had become too influential, too protected. His connections reach into offices I'm afraid to even think about. And I have a family. Guerrero fell silent, staring into the fire. I could see his hands trembling. Do you understand now, Victor? He whispered. Adrian isn't just a criminal. He's a predator. He doesn't kill the body right away, he drinks the soul. He uses drugs that induce a chemical lobotomy. A person turns into a vegetable while maintaining the appearance of life. It's the perfect crime. I stood up and walked to the window. In the reflection of the glass, I saw my own face, old, etched with wrinkles. Adrian's words about my wife, Lydia, were still ringing in my ears. He said I was the one who taught her this, I said without turning around. He said Anna chose him because he reminded her of me. And the most terrifying part, Ignacio, is that there's some truth to it. I was a tyrant. I believed that discipline and control were what love looked like. We all make mistakes, Victor, Guerrero said softly. But you have a chance to fix things. I don't. My hands are stained because I stayed silent. I turned sharply toward him. I need proof. Not the ramblings of a dying man, but facts. Medical records, names of the drugs, invoices. If he's injecting her with psychotropic substances, they have to be in that house somewhere. Guerrero nodded. He has a safe in his study. That's where he keeps his trophies, his wife's journals, medical histories, recordings. He collects their downfalls. But you'll never get in there. Security won't take their eyes off you. I don't need to get in there, I cut him off. I need him to show me everything himself. I pulled the business card Adrian had given me out of my pocket. He offered me hush money. Tomorrow, I'll call him and tell him I agree. I'll demand a face-to-face meeting to sign the papers. Ignacio, I'm going to need your help. You need to arrange it so that people he can't buy are present at that meeting. It's dangerous, Victor. He'll kill you if he suspects anything. I'm already dead, Ignacio. I died the moment I saw my daughter on that welcome mat. The only thing that matters now is getting her out of there. The next morning, I called Adrian. My voice was calm and slightly broken, the voice of an old man who had surrendered to circumstances. I agree, I said when he picked up. Your terms. They're reasonable. I want Anna to have everything she needs, and I wouldn't mind some peace and quiet in my old age. I could almost physically feel Adrian smiling on the other end of the line. A wise decision, Victor. I knew you were a practical man. But I want to sign the documents today, I added. I have a ticket for the evening train to Chicago. Let's meet in your study at 3 o'clock. Of course. I'll have the paperwork ready. At 3 in the afternoon, I stood before the estate gates once again. This time, security let me through without a word. Adrian was waiting for me in his study. He looked like a victor, relaxed, wearing an expensive cashmere sweater, a glass of juice in his hand. Come in, Victor. Have a seat. A folder with legal documents lay on the desk. I skimmed through them. A standard non-disclosure agreement and a life care settlement in exchange for waiving all future claims. Where is Anna? I asked. Resting. She was given a sedative after yesterday's incident. I picked up the pen but didn't rush to sign. You know, Adrian, before I go, I want to understand one thing. You're not just doing this for the money. You have more than enough. Why this whole show with the mat and the crazy maid? Adrian laughed. It was a cold, dry laugh. You're a surgeon, Victor. You should understand. What's the most powerful feeling in the world? Love? No. Power. Absolute, total power over another being. When you can make a person believe they are nothing. When you can erase their personality and write whatever you want in its place. It's a divine feeling. He walked over to the wall safe and entered the code. I watched his fingers intently, but he stood so that nothing could be seen. The safe clicked open. Want to see? Adrian pulled out a small black notebook. This is Marina's diary. My first wife. She described how she was slowly losing her mind. And right here, he pointed to the vials deep inside the safe, are the drugs that helped her along. The latest developments. No trace in the blood after 6 hours, just shattered neural pathways. You're a monster, I said quietly. No, I'm your best student, he parried. I just took it further. You controlled their lives, I control their minds. At that moment, the study door burst open. Adrian flinched and tried to slam the safe shut, but I managed to wedge a heavy bronze statuette from the desk between the door and the frame. Ignacio Guerrero walked into the room, followed by 2 men in dark suits. Adrian Dominguez, one of them said, flashing a badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Miller. We have a warrant for your arrest and a search of these premises on suspicion of drug trafficking and fraud. Adrian turned pale. He looked at Guerrero, then at me. You. You old fool. You ruined everything. He screamed, trying to shove the agents away. No, Adrian, I said, watching as the handcuffs clicked onto his wrists. I just performed surgery. I removed the tumor. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. If it resonated with you, give it a like, comment on what touched you the most, and be sure to mention where you're from. Subscribe to the channel, there are plenty more stories to come.